for my channel, The Mental Traveler. I'm Caro Herrera, and today I'm going to be reviewing a book trilogy called The Last Lion. These books are a biography on Winston Churchill's life, and while the first two books were written by William Manchester, he died before the third one could be published, which is why the last volume was co-written by Paul Reed. The books are quite long, and they cover different periods of his life. The first volume is named Visions of Glory, and it covers the years from 1874 to 1932. The second volume is Alone, from 1933 to 1940, and the last one is called Defender of the Realm, focusing on the years 1940 to 1965. Anyways, before I begin, let me just say that unless you don't want to know that much about Churchill, you should beware watching this review. Okay, so the first book covers from Winston Churchill's birth in 1974 up till 1932. We follow him during childhood and adolescence, meet his family, follow him through his school years, and during his many travels all over the world as a soldier and as a war correspondent and a journalist in Cuba, India, Egypt, the Boer War. And this book also covers his marriage and his role as a parent, the way he got involved in politics, what he did during World War I, and the Roaring Twenties. The second book covers the years 1932 to 1940, and it's mostly about not only what Winston was up to in his personal and political life, but it gives a very detailed account of everything that led up to World War II, and how Churchill was always on the lookout for more news about it because he knew Hitler was a madman before anyone else of his peers did. It ends when he is named as Prime Minister just months after England declared war on Germany. The final book covers Winston Churchill's years as Prime Minister and everything he did in order to win the war despite the odds. What he did in the years after World War II, what he did when he became Prime Minister for the second time, his retirement, and his death at the age of 90. Okay, so I really love this biography and really recommend it because after having read it, I can only conclude that Winston Churchill truly was an amazing legend. A great man whose likes the world hasn't seen for a long while since. So reading about his life was a unique experience. It was exciting and hard to believe at times that those things actually happened to a real person and not to a fictional character. But before I begin gushing over in detail about what a great man Winston Churchill was, I'd like to point out the pros and cons of this trilogy. The pros would be that it is evident that William Manchester and Paul Reed poured out their souls into writing these books, and I am in awe of the amount of research they did and the organization skills they must have used in order to write the trilogy. Plus, the author mentions books that I love like Far Pavilions and the Forsyte Saga, so that made me feel like he was a kindred spirit to me in some way. As to the writing style, the first book was by far my favorite one. It was exciting and beautiful and it read almost like a novel, and I read it in just a matter of days. But the second and third books were a letdown when it comes to the writing style. Why? Well, because they were super tedious. I seriously love history, but I found these two books, particularly the second one, really boring because they read like dry textbooks and they simply had too much information. I was in the mood for lighter reading, so the first book was perfect for me at the time, but book two was just too much. With this, I mean that, for example, the author explains us every single thing that happened that led to World War II and how Churchill reacted to it. And then while it was really interesting to learn how he was the only one who for years knew what Hitler was and what he wanted, and it's fascinating to see how Winston secretly started preparing to fight him since the government wouldn't listen to his warnings, I think it would have been even better if we hadn't had every single thing that led up to World War II explained to us, because it seriously got to a point where it was too much and it took me weeks to finish the second book because it was very heavy reading. The third book was better, and it was logical and interesting that we would follow in detail what Winston Churchill did during World War II as Britain's Prime Minister, but I was really looking forward to having his relationship with the Queen expanded to see how accurate the Crown had portrayed them. But the book didn't really cover that period. So yeah, in the end, I still recommend you to read this trilogy, but you do have to bear in mind these things so as not to get any nasty surprises like I did. Still, I can't wrap up this review without mentioning why I ended up in awe of Churchill, because sure, his triumph over Nazism is his greatest accomplishment, but there are just so many things to the man, and I am thankful to The Last Lion trilogy for making me aware of them. Things like the following. Winston Churchill also loved the past just like me. He was a war correspondent and a reporter, and I'm a journalist, so that link was cool. He had a close relationship with different members of the royal family, and he was a royalist like I am, even though I didn't know how badly his reputation had suffered during the abdication due to his friendship with Edward VIII. and we both hate Bolsheviks who are appalled by the Romanov murderers. Also, he was a tremendous writer, and I am an aspiring writer myself, and he read some things that interest me, like the Racial Hornblower series. He was friends with interesting men like Lawrence of Arabia, Wendell Randolph Hearst, Charles Chaplin. He met Albert Einstein, and he actually visited the British Raj, and I'm obsessed with this time period. He participated in the Boer War, and he was in wars Egypt and Cuba, and he got quite a big role to play during the Great War, even if his reputation was unjustly stained by Gallipoli and the Deschanels. Still, I didn't know that he'd actually fought at the trenches because he would rather die than do nothing during World War I. But since he was also a politician during this time, it was interesting to see World War I from that point of view. Anyways, I think I'm going to rewatch Darkest Hour with a new perspective now as well, because now I know that Halifax and Neville Chamberlain had the gall to stand up to Winston after he became Prime Minister, even though they'd ignored his yearly warnings about Hitler. But yeah, this leads me to mention Dunkirk and just how lucky Winston was, not only to have come up with such a scheme, but through different periods of his life. Men nowadays don't really live lives like him. But yeah, to wrap up this review, I'd just like to mention two more things. That I actually found it eerily cool to learn that Titanic's senior surviving officer actually participated in the Dunkirk evacuation, and that now the scenes where Churchill talks about the daughter he lost in the first season of The Crown will be more emotional for me. Okay, so I've always been a history lover and an Anglophile, so while I can't remember when was the first time that I ever heard of Winston Churchill, before reading this trilogy I already knew about him because over the years he's been portrayed by several actors in a lot of productions that I've watched, from Robert Hardy to Brian Cox, Timothy Spall, Bob Hoskins, Richard Burton, Timothy West. Still, my favorite portrayals of Winston Churchill are those of Gary Oldman in Darkest Hour and John Lithgow in The Crown. The former because he's always been one of my biggest crushes and he's a fantastic actor, and the latter because he was the one to really kindle my interest in finding more about Winston Churchill. Why? Well, back when the first season of The Crown aired, I was blown away by Lithgow's performance. He really did a beautiful job with that role, and especially loved it for two things: because of the way his relationship with the young Queen Elizabeth is presented, and because of the way he inspired one of his secretaries. And I don't know, but I just love the fact that the Queen's first Prime Minister was no other than that great Winston Churchill himself. And it sort of echoes what happened with Queen Victoria and Lord Melbourne. And then I start to think of how Winston Churchill was born during Victoria's reign and how he died under the rule of another queen. That, well, being a royalist, I just love all the ways in which history connects itself. But also, in episode 4 of the first season of The Crown, Churchill's secretary, Venetia Scott, is shown reading his memoirs and sort of falling in love with him, saying how she finds the young Winston more exciting than the average man she's met. He really becomes an inspiring role model for her, and when she quotes back to him lines from one of his memoirs, something in me just clicked. I got excited not only because I feel like I would have behaved exactly the same had I been in Venetia's shoes, but also because there was something about Winston's words that was so beautiful that I knew I had to read his biography one day. And I'll just quote this passage so you can know what I'm referring to. "Hear it is, young men and women everywhere, and proclaim it far and wide. The earth is yours and the fullness thereof. Be kind but fierce. You're needed now more than ever before. Take up the mantle of change, for this is your time." Isn't that beautiful? Anyways, back in the first month of 2021, I rewatched Darkest Hour twice, and I started to really look forward to reading Winston's autobiography, but he wrote so many, and they're so lengthy that I'm a bit daunted by that task. I did get Winston Churchill's account of his time in Kenya, because I love movies set in the early 20th century in that place, for example, out of Africa. But yeah, I ended up researching what was the best biography out there about Winston Churchill, and that's how I stumbled upon The Last Lion Trilogy. For the moment though, I believe that this is all I have to say about this trilogy. Thank you so much for watching my review of these books. Please let me know if you enjoyed the video or not, as well as what are your own thoughts regarding Winston Churchill, his life, the portrayals of him, these books, other biographies, his autobiographies, anything that's relevant. I would love to talk about it all with you. In the description box below you can find a link to the Goodreads page for the trilogy. And well, I'm Carolina, the Mental Traveler, and I hope you have a wonderful day wherever you are in the world. I'll be seeing you soon, take care, and goodbye!